Well, it's Thursday, and we are still in the midst of adjustment, disruption, and transition on a huge scale due to the pandemic health crisis that we're facing here in our society today. Now, because of that, many people, many companies, organizations, businesses are being disrupted in the way that they normally proceed with their normal operations, as well as we as individuals. Our lives have been affected. What I want to share with you today is a just a brief training on what I call the three common pitfalls in transition and disruption. Okay, there's going to be challenge in every transitional season. There are always challenges that we have to face, but there are some pitfalls. There's some traps that if we step off into them, they're going to greatly impact us in these seasons, and they're going to impede our ability to make any kind of beneficial progress. So that makes knowing what these are very important, because if we know what these traps are, we can avoid them. We can navigate around them and not become stuck or trapped in them. So that's the reason why I want to share with you this training today about the three common pitfalls. The goal is that as we're aware of them, we can avoid them. Okay. So let me give you these three. Here's the first one. And it's a very common one, and it's one that we fall off into sometimes without realizing it. So we need to pay attention, and that is the pitfall of isolation. Becoming isolated is very easy to do in times of transition and disruption. This is true for us as individuals, but our companies, our businesses, our organizations, our teams, we can become isolated. The problem with isolation is the loss. I apologize for the email dinging through. I think I just took care of that. The issue of loss of connection of relationships that matter. Important relationships get cut off when we isolate. That's true individually. When we separate ourselves, we become isolated from our family members, friends, confidants, people that we need in our lives to be healthy. And isolation cuts us off from that, and we lose the healthy balance that those connections bring to us. That loss of connection of relationship is a big deal. It's true in business and organizations. We need to be sure we don't get disconnected from our customers or our clients or our team members, our employees. If we do, if we allow ourselves to get isolated and we begin to play that inside our own headspace, trying to work things out, disconnected from those important relationships, well, when we do decide to say something, we're really going to sound tone deaf, and we're going to lose our ability to express empathy and thereby have the ability to express authority to solve any problem they might have. Because in isolation, we're not going to be aware of what they're facing, and we can fall prey very easily to trying to address or answer questions that our clients or customers aren't really asking. That's not really their problem. You see, when this transition and disruption hit, all the problems that you were offering solutions to prior to this, that's all changed. And so you need to be aware of that. But isolation is a trap. And if you allow yourself to go there, it's going to cut you off from important relationships. You need that information. You need the health of that, as well as it's going to skew your attitude and your perspective. It's going to become an unhealthy thing. Isolation is always unhealthy. Now, it's one thing to pull aside, to take some time to separate and get your thoughts and workouts. I get that, but isolation is different than that. Isolation is when we become very withdrawn and inward, and it leads to skewed attitudes and perspectives and usually unhealthy conclusions. And that's not something we want right now in our businesses, organizations, companies, or teams, or in our individual lives. We don't want that. That's unhealthy. That's a trap. Isolation. Now we're being told that we have to practice physical distancing. If you didn't know, that's the new term, physical distancing. Now, basically, they're saying stay separated for everyone's health, your health, and the health of others. I get that. But we can be separated without becoming isolated. And that's very, very important. Don't lose the connection with those important relationships in your life, personally, or in the life of your company, your business, your organization, or your team. And so, what is the solution? What do we do? Well, we have to become proactive. We don't sit back and wait for someone else to reach out to us. We become proactive and we reach out to them. If you have developed an email list, you should be utilizing that right now. Be proactive. Email people, your clients. Stay in contact with your team members, your employees. Stay in contact with your potential customers. Add value. Be proactive in making those connections. Don't become isolated. You need to reach out to them and you need to hear when they respond back to you. We need that interaction. We need it personally, but our businesses, companies, organizations, and teams need it as well. Isolation is a huge trap. Don't fall into it. Avoid it by being proactive in reaching out and making inroads into the lives of the people that you need to stay connected to. All right, so that is the first one, isolation. Here is the second. The second one is comparison. Now, I understand that we can observe and we can learn, and that we should. We should be observing other companies and what they're doing and learn from their mistakes, perhaps, so that we don't repeat them. I get that. I'm a huge proponent of vicarious learning, both organizationally as well as individually. That's not what I'm talking about, though. I'm not talking about not paying attention to things that people are doing that might be helpful. Comparison is different. Comparison is when we begin to measure our worth or our value against someone else or something else, another organization or company. What that is an unhealthy way of assessment. That's an unhealthy assessment, and it's an unhelpful influence into our experience because it's a setup. Comparison is a setup. When we start to measure our worth and value based on what we're looking at in some other person or some other company's experience, then that's a problem because it's a setup for us to either judge ourselves to be doing far better than we are or far worse than we are. We're not going to get an accurate assessment of where we are, which would allow us to chart a course to where we want to be. So comparison, you need to understand that just because one company has a solution doesn't mean that solution will work for yours. Everybody's unique. Each organization has its own unique things to it. Each customer base is a little bit unique. And so you can't just cookie cutter apply solutions. A comparison will cause you to try to do that, and it's unhealthy. You shouldn't do it. You need to avoid this thing where you begin to measure your worth or value against another organization or against another individual. You know what? You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what their challenges are. They may be different than your challenges. The answers that might work for you might not work for them, and the answers that work for them may not work for you. So you want to avoid this trap of comparison. It leads to unhealthy assessment and unhelpful influence. Sets us up for either pride and arrogance and false confidence, or discouragement, ultimately despair, and causes us to want to throw in the towel. So those are not things we want to do right now. That's not going to help us navigate our transitional season. So comparison is a trap. Avoid it. You can learn, observe, and learn lessons. That's great. Just don't measure your own value and worth based on how someone else is doing or how you think someone else is doing. Okay? That's the second most common pitfall in times of transition and disruption, is we fall into the trap of comparison. How do we solve that? What's the solution? Well, the solution is to recognize and commit to the fact that we have our own path to walk. We have to own that reality. We're going to walk our own path. We're going to be who we are. We're not going to try to be who they are. We're not going to try to be what that company is. This is our company. It's a great time for us to say, this is who we are. This is what we're about. And this is what we're going to do. That's the key. If you fall into the trap of comparison, you're trying to be someone that you're not, or you're trying to be something that you're not, and that won't end well. So avoid the trap of comparison reason by owning your own path. Walk your path. Be who you are. Remind yourself of why this company, this organization, this team, why it exists, so that you can walk the path that you're on. Learn from others, but don't fall into the trap of comparison. Okay, here's the third one, the third most common that I encounter at least, and that is excuses. Excuses. Yeah, now let me clarify the difference between an excuse and a reason. There are always reasons for why we are where we are. We could list the reasons. We can say, oh, the reason we're having to do this right now is a pandemic, a health crisis. It started somewhere else in the world. That's a reason. The government has mandated we can't operate this way anymore. That's a reason. There are always reasons for why we are where we are. However, when we begin to take that list of reasons and use them as an excuse to justify our lack of action or ownership of responsibility for our action, that's a problem. And it's a huge trap. And we do it all the time. And companies do it, organizations do it, as well as individuals. We fall prey to this. We fall in and we get stuck here. We're taking reasons and using them as excuses. I get it. There are always reasons for why we are where we are. Some of those reasons extremely valid. Some of those reasons not our fault. Let me use this illustration. If I were to be practicing my physical distancing, walking in the green belt of my neighborhood, and someone comes running by and slashes me across the arm with a blade and just keeps going, I can say, well, that just happened. I didn't do anything to create that. I was maintaining my distance there. This is why. Here's the reason why I now have this cut on my arm. But if you were to come back and see me a week or so, 2 weeks later, and see that my arm has gotten very swollen, it's inflamed, it looks terrible, it's turning a weird shade off color, and you go, my gosh, what is that? And I said to you, well, somebody did this to me. This just happened. Somebody else did this. Wasn't my fault. That's why my arm is the way it is. And then if you came back to me even a couple of weeks later and realized my arm is missing, and you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? And I say, well, somebody did this to me. And that's why my arm is gone. It got infected. It had to be cut off. Well, most of us understand how ridiculous that would be as it relates to a physical thing. But here's what I need you to understand. While that physical cut happened, wasn't my fault. It was a reason now that I have an issue with my arm. The moment that happened, it became my responsibility to take care of it and do something about it. I know we can say this pandemic and all the stuff going on, that's the reason we're struggling. That's why we're in the transition and disruption that we're experiencing. But the minute it happened, even though that wasn't your fault, you didn't do that, it happened to you, someone else did it, mandates have come down from others. Hey, the moment it happened, it became our responsibility to navigate it and to own it and take responsibility. Because that's one of the things excuses do. They shift blame and responsibility, and they allow us to just be passive and not take action or own the consequences of what are going to go forward. So we have to own that. And that's how we avoid this trap, this trap. We make the decision to take responsibility for our own well-being. We decide we're going to own the responsibility for our personal well-being and for our organizations, our companies, our businesses, our teams. We're going to own that responsibility. Now, we have reasons for why we're having to face what we're facing, but we're not going to let those reasons be an excuse that lead to inactivity or passivity or shifting the blame and responsibility to someone else. We're going to own it, and we're going to take responsibility for our own well-being. We avoid the trap of excuses by taking personal responsibility. That's the key. And we're not saying it's my fault I got in this situation. We're just saying now that we're here, I'm going to take responsibility for how I get from here to where I want to be. That is significant. So excuses, huge trap. We fall into this all the time when we take reasons and use them as excuses. When we excuse ourselves from taking necessary action, when we excuse ourselves for taking care of ourselves after some type of an injury occurs, like this disruption is causing for so many of my friends and myself, even in times of business. The reason I'm on here today, the reason I'm sharing this brief training on the 3 common pitfalls, I want to add value. I don't want to add to your noise. I want to be helpful. It's why I started the Strong Bridge Group. We train leaders of organizations, businesses, companies, teams. We train leaders in nonprofit as well as for profit how to navigate these types of seasons. And one of the things we talk about is avoiding these pitfalls. So I want to share it because I want to be helpful. Hey, you know what? We're going to get through this. Now, here's how you can remember these 3 common pitfalls. Just the simple word ICE: isolation, comparison, and excuses. You want to avoid these traps. You fall off into these, and they're going to impede your progress, and they're going to make this much harder than it needs to be. Don't allow yourself to get isolated. Don't fall prey to comparison where you measure your value and worth, or the worth or value of your organization, company, business, or team against someone else. Don't do that, and don't allow reasons to become excuses. If you will avoid these 3 common pitfalls, you're going to navigate this season of transition and disruption much more effectively. Thank you so much for watching today. Thank you for tuning in. If this was helpful, leave a comment. I appreciate the feedback. If there's another topic about transition and disruption that you would like for me to address, leave me a message. I will read it. And if I have something of value to say, then I will do a video on that topic as well. Thank you again for watching. If you feel this is helpful and might be helpful to others, please share. If you would like to get any of these videos when I do them on my channel, hit subscribe. Thanks again for tuning in. Appreciate you. And you know what? We're going to get through this. We really will. But let's stay out of the trap of isolation, comparison, and excuses. We avoid those 3. We're going to do a whole lot better. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon.